In this video, we'll be looking at Spectrum Matcher, an effect from my JSFX set. Spectrum Matcher analyzes the long-term spectrums of sounds and can display the difference between a reference sound and another input, and even automatically correct with EQ. It can be used to match the timbres of different vocal tracks or takes, or as an aid when mixing, mastering, or a bunch of other creative uses. A couple of people on the forum have used it to analyze room acoustics. But for this video, we're just going to look at the basic operation. We start with two vocal tracks with noticeably different timbres. Here's the first one.
I remember those mistakes I made, forgiven on the day, but everyone has left a bruise on me that's never gone away.
And here's the second.
And now I feel like Lazarus rising from the dead, and I can feel those circuit breakers coming on again.
We want to take the first one and make it match the second. You might want to do this within a piece if something changed between takes, but I've also used it to start my album mixing by getting all the vocals, drums and bass tracks across all the different songs of the album and get them to match, and then I'm more likely to get a consistent sound at the end of the mix. To do that, first we put Spectrum Matcher on the reference track, which is our second one. We now play it through and Spectrum Matcher will analyse the timbre.
And now I feel like Lazarus.
In the bottom pane, you can see the short-term spectrum in green and the long-term spectrum in yellow. The long-term spectrum is not a simple average, and it's not quite a peak either, it's somewhere in between. You can also see the blue curve, which is the reference spectrum which it's trying to match to. In the top half it shows the difference between the long-term spectrum of the input and the reference spectrum. We haven't loaded a meaningful reference in, so ignore that for now. In fact, we actually want to save this spectrum as the new reference, so we go into the Learn page. If you want to change any of the parameters here, or just redo the analysis, you hit Reset and it will clear itself. But if we have the analysis we want, we hit Save. You can see now that the blue and yellow lines are right on top of each other, and the red display at the top is completely flat because our reference is exactly the same as our input. To be able to use this reference later, we save it as a preset. We could also just make a copy of the spectrum by dragging it and so on, but presets are nice and reusable. Having saved this, we can actually remove Spectrum Matcher and possibly even the track itself. Now we look at the first track, the one we want to change. We put Spectrum Matcher onto this and play the input through like we did before. In fact, if we were super cunning, we could have put Spectrum Matcher on both the tracks at the same time, so that we only had to play it through once. But we're doing it this way because it's a better explanation of what's going on. Now, at any point, before or after our analysis, we can load in our reference spectrum from the preset. We now have the analysed spectrum and the correct reference, so we can see the difference between the two tracks. We're missing some of the mid-frequencies and we need a bit more on the top end. If we hover over the top display with our mouse, we can see some decibel values and frequency ranges in red. Now, one option is to correct this with EQ. So we put EQ before Spectrum Matcher and then add in the adjustments as indicated by the graph. So here, a bit off the middle, a bit on the high and low, and then run through the analysis again to see if it comes out flat. But the simpler thing to do is to hit Correct. This will assemble a filter to compensate for the difference between the two tracks. So if we have a listen.
I remember those mistakes I made, forgiven on the day, but everyone has left.
And the reference track.
Feel those circuit breakers coming on again, my heart is shedding all.
That's much closer. This correction is based on the analysis, so it's actually still updating based on what we play in. It also won't save this analysis if you reset and reload or make a copy of the effect. So if you want to keep this correction, you need to hit Freeze. We can now see that the top display has turned blue instead of red. Not only does this mean it will save the correction as part of the configuration, so it's in the project, but it also takes up much less CPU because it's no longer doing input analysis. You should always hit Freeze when you're happy with the correction, and if you need to reset and do the analysis again, there's always this reset button. So that's the basics of how to use Spectrum Matcher. If you're interested, there are links at the bottom including how to install it. I'm doing videos for my other effects too, so do have a look for those if you're interested, and bookmark and subscribe for any future ones. I hope this video is useful, and I hope you find Spectrum Matcher useful as well.